When the Coalition fleet first appeared in Earth's orbit, most people on the ground didn't even know what to think. The ships looked clean, quiet, and almost too perfect, like something made in a place where nothing ever went wrong. News channels kept repeating the same message over and over. The visitors were peaceful, curious, and only wanted to observe. The Coalition had visited many worlds before Earth, so they came with confidence. They believed humans would be simple to understand, just another young species, learning to stand in a much bigger universe. For the Coalition, combat was something they studied like old history. Their soldiers trained inside hologram rooms, where the worst thing that could happen was a simulation shutting down. They followed perfect rules, perfect formations, and perfect strategies. They believed anything outside their control was impossible. Their commanders often said that real chaos no longer existed in their part of the galaxy dot, so when they reached Earth, they expected a quiet planet, a peaceful world, a species with limited experience in real conflict. They brought their nicest uniforms, polished their badges, and carried themselves with the confidence of a teacher arriving at a small school. They didn't arrive with arrogance in their hearts, but with a misunderstanding, the kind that grows in places untouched by hardship. Earth's leaders welcomed them kindly. They didn't show fear or excitement, just respect. The Coalition mistook this calmness as a sign that humans lacked real strength or complexity. They believed humans were impressed by them. But Earth had seen too much history, too many ups and downs, to be easily shaken. A joint training demonstration was planned a few days after the Coalition's arrival. It was meant to be a friendly exchange, something to build trust. The Coalition asked to observe Earth's best combat specialists. They expected sharp young recruits, maybe some advanced helmets or protective suits. Instead, Earth announced something unexpected. Their representatives would be a group of retired veterans. When the visitors heard this, they became confused. Veterans? Retired? They whispered among themselves quietly. Why would humans send older fighters to meet an advanced interstellar force? Someone even asked Earth's liaison, "Are these truly your experienced specialists?" The liaison simply smiled and replied, "You'll understand soon." That answer only made the Coalition more puzzled. The facility chosen for the meeting was far from crowded cities. It sat near mountains, surrounded by trees, open land, and wind that carried the smell of soil and grass. The Coalition expected a high-tech base with glowing platforms and moving screens. Instead, they found something simple and human: concrete buildings, worn paths, and training grounds that looked real, not artificial. The veterans arrived one by one. They weren't dressed in shiny armor. They didn't walk in perfect lines. Some moved slowly, some carried themselves with stiff steps, and some had the calm expression of people who had lived long enough to see joy, fear, and everything in between. The Coalition soldiers tried to read their faces, but couldn't understand what kind of emotion lived behind those quiet eyes. The visitors had never seen people like this, individuals who looked like they had nothing to prove but still carried an invisible weight. The veterans didn't boast. They didn't act tough. They just observed, listened, and took everything in with a steady gaze. One veteran looked at the Coalition's equipment with mild curiosity, almost like someone examining a tool they might use but didn't fully trust yet. Another stood with hands behind his back, watching the visitors' polished gear and perfect posture. The Coalition soldiers, noticing their calm demeanor, exchanged confused glances. They whispered things like, "Do they understand why they're here?" And they looked too relaxed. The veterans noticed the whispers, but didn't react. They had spent years reading people's faces, understanding fear and pride without hearing a single word. To them, the Coalition soldiers looked young not by age, but by experience. A Coalition commander stepped forward, speaking with confidence. He explained how their joint exercise would demonstrate unity and cooperation between Earth and the larger galaxy. He spoke about structure, rules, and simulation protocols. His voice had the tone of someone used to being respected. The veterans listened politely, never interrupting. When he finished, one of the veterans simply nodded and said, "Combat isn't about how perfect you look. It's about staying calm when everything around you falls apart." His voice was steady, not challenging, just honest. The coalition commander blinked, unsure how to respond. That kind of statement didn't exist in their manuals, but the observers took notes, marking the veterans' words as primitive mindset influenced by history. They believed humanity still lived with the memories of old wars and had not evolved beyond them. They didn't understand that surviving hardship had made humans adaptable, creative, and steady under pressure. To prepare for the demonstration, the coalition opened their supplies and laid out their equipment in neat lines. Everything was spotless and organized. Their tools had a shine that looked untouched by real-world dust or sweat. Meanwhile, Earth's veterans gathered their own gear similar, less polished, but carried with the confidence of people who had used similar tools for years. As the sun moved across the sky, Earth's facility grew warmer. The coalition soldiers kept adjusting their suits, unaccustomed to the natural heat. The veterans didn't seem bothered. They had trained in deserts, forests, rain, and cold winds long before spaceflight was even a dream. To them, weather was just part of the world. Before the exercise began, a coalition officer asked one veteran, "Are you prepared? Our simulations are highly advanced." The veteran gave a small smile, the kind a teacher gives when a student thinks they've understood everything. "Preparation isn't the hard part," he said calmly. "It's handling the unexpected." The words didn't fit into any of the coalition's rules or protocols. They only confused the officer further. By late afternoon, both groups stood on the training field. The coalition soldiers stood tall, forming perfect rows, their faces focused. The veterans were more relaxed, standing with casual stances. To an outside observer, it might seem like they weren't ready at all, but Earth's leaders knew better. A quiet moment passed before the signal for the exercise was given. The wind picked up slightly, carrying dust across the ground. A bird flew across the sky, its shadow passing over both groups. Nobody spoke, but everyone felt the tension building. The coalition believed they were about to show humanity how modern, controlled combat worked. They expected the veterans to struggle, to learn from them, maybe even to admire them. They had no idea what was coming. Earth's leaders watched from a distance, their expressions calm but thoughtful. They knew that this meeting wasn't just about training, it was about two different worlds learning who they truly were. The coalition thought combat was clean, simple, and predictable. Earth's veterans came from a world that rarely offered perfect answers. When the final check was completed and the field fell silent, one thought shaped the air of that moment, something neither side said aloud, but both would soon understand. This demonstration would change everything. The morning of the meeting felt different. Not because anything loud was happening, but because the air carried a quiet kind of curiosity. The coalition delegates arrived early at the facility, moving with the same smooth coordination they always showed. Their uniforms were spotless, their gear neatly attached, and their faces held the same focused expression. To them, this was a formal event, something that required discipline and perfect posture. The Earth staff greeted them politely and guided them toward a long open field where the veterans were expected to assemble. The coalition hoped this time they would see younger, more energetic fighters, people who matched their idea of a well-trained force. But as they reached the field, they saw a familiar sight. Older men and women, walking with calm steps, carrying simple gear, and speaking quietly among themselves. Some of the coalition delegates exchanged glances. A few of them tilted their heads in surprise. One whispered to another, "They are the same ones from yesterday." "These are the veterans again?" The other delegate nodded, still trying to make sense of it. "Maybe this is their tradition," he replied softly. "Or maybe they want to show respect." They weren't trying to mock or criticize. They just didn't understand. Their own military system relied on youth, precision, and advanced equipment. The idea of relying on older fighters felt strange to them, especially in an era where technology was seen as the only path toward perfection. The veterans didn't seem bothered by the visitors' confusion. They walked with steady steps, their faces relaxed. Some had lines around their eyes from years of weather and sun. Others carried themselves with the kind of confidence that never needed to be spoken out loud. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't here to prove anything. Their presence was their message. One veteran, tall and quiet, walked near the visitors and gave them a polite greeting. The coalition soldiers nodded back quickly, unsure how to respond. They were trained to show respect, but they didn't know how to read the veteran's calm expression. Was it confidence? Was it experience? Was it something else? They couldn't tell. Earth's liaison stepped forward and invited both groups to gather near an old building at the edge of the training ground. The building looked simple: concrete walls, a metal roof, and a door that creaked slightly in the wind. The coalition expected holograms or futuristic design, but Earth had chosen this place on purpose. It wasn't about showing off technology. It was about showing something real. Inside the building, chairs were arranged in a circle. The veterans sat with comfortable postures, not stiff or formal. The coalition, however, sat with straight backs, hands on their legs, following protocol. They waited for instructions, ready to take notes. Once everyone settled, the liaison gave a short introduction. He explained that Earth believed in learning through real experience, not just simulations. "These individuals," he said gently, "have lived through moments where calm thinking saved not only themselves, but the people around them. We brought them here because they understand something that can't always be taught through machines." The coalition officers listened carefully, though some still struggled to accept it. One delegate raised a hand politely. "With respect," he said, "our systems use advanced training models. We have studied countless scenarios. Our troops have never faced real danger, but we believe our methods prepare us for any situation." A veteran sitting opposite him leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Simulations can teach you patterns," he said, "but real situations don't follow patterns. They twist when you don't expect it. They force you to adapt, not just repeat instructions." He paused, then added, "You learn the most when things refuse to go your way." The coalition officer nodded slowly, but his eyes showed uncertainty. His mind understood the words, but his experience didn't match them. In their world, unpredictability had been removed from life long ago. Machines controlled their training. Environments and safety measures never allowed real mistakes. Chaos was just a concept to them, not something they had ever felt in their bones. Another veteran joined the conversation, speaking with a quiet tone. "We are not trying to compare your methods to ours," he said. "We're only here to show you how we handle things when plans break. That's what tomorrow's exercise is for." The coalition soldiers looked at each other again. They weren't scared, just confused. They couldn't imagine a situation where plans broke. Their entire training was built around preventing that. After the discussion, everyone stepped outside into the open air. A cool breeze moved through the field. Birds called from the trees. The world felt natural and grounded, something the coalition wasn't used to. Their own planets were quieter, controlled by technology that softened every edge of nature. They rarely felt the raw unpredictability of the environment. As the group walked across the field, the veterans moved with ease, their steps natural. The coalition soldiers walked in perfect formation, matching each other's pace like a single unit. One Earth staff member noticed this difference and gave a small smile. "They really are disciplined," he whispered to a veteran doc. The veteran nodded. "Discipline is good," he said, "but handling the unexpected is better." Later, the visitors were invited to watch the veterans train among themselves. They expected sharp drills, synchronized movements, or modern weapon displays. But instead, they saw something more subtle. The veterans communicated with small gestures, quiet signals, and instinctive movements. They didn't need loud commands or holographic maps. They had learned to read terrain, wind, and each other without overthinking. One coalition soldier leaned closer to another and whispered in surprise, "How do they understand each other without speaking?" His partner replied, "It must be some kind of Earth technique." But it wasn't a technique, it was experience. Years of real training had taught the veterans how to read tiny details that simulations never taught. The sun climbed higher, and soon it was time for a break. The veterans sat in the shade of a large tree, drinking water, talking casually, and laughing now and then. The coalition soldiers, unsure how to behave during a break, stood in neat rows until their commander allowed them to rest. Eventually, one of the veterans walked over and invited them to sit under the tree as well. "You don't have to stand in the sun," he said with a kind smile. "Come sit with us." The coalition soldiers hesitated. They weren't used to informal interactions with other military units. But the commander gave a small nod, so they walked over and sat down. It felt strange at first, but slowly the tense atmosphere softened. The veterans asked them simple questions. Where were they from? What were their worlds like? What did they enjoy outside of training? The coalition soldiers answered awkwardly at first, but relaxed as the conversation continued. They had never spoken with people who lived through so many changes, who had seen things that didn't fit into neat categories. The veterans spoke about weather, long journeys, teamwork, and moments where simple decisions changed everything. None of their stories were dramatic or frightening. They were just honest, that the coalition soldiers listened closely. Something about the veterans' tone, the calm, grounded way they spoke felt unusual. It wasn't pride, it wasn't arrogance, it was understanding. And that understanding came from a place simulations could not reach by the end of the break. Something had subtly changed. The visitors didn't look at the veterans as mysterious old fighters anymore. They now sensed that these people held something real, something their own training had never touched as. The day slowly shifted toward evening. The liaison gathered both groups again and explained the schedule for the next day's joint exercise. The coalition soldiers nodded, ready to follow every instruction exactly. The veterans simply listened, already thinking ahead about how the terrain might shift or how the weather might change overnight. When the meeting ended, the coalition soldiers walked back to their transport shuttles quietly. They didn't speak much, but their expressions showed thoughtfulness. They were beginning to understand that Earth's representatives were not chosen randomly. They were chosen because they understood humanity's strength more deeply than anyone else. Meanwhile, the veterans watched the visitors leave. One of them turned to the liaison and said, "They're good people. They just haven't seen life outside controlled walls." The liaison nodded. "They will learn," he replied softly. And as the sun faded behind the mountains, both sides prepared for the day that would change their understanding forever. The coalition believed they were ready. The veterans knew they were not, but they also knew this was the beginning of something important. The next morning arrived quietly, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The sky was clear, the sun was soft, and a light breeze moved across the training ground. The coalition soldiers marched in perfect formation toward the field, their gear shining under the daylight. They looked ready, every step measured, every gesture controlled, every expression fixed with discipline. Earth's veterans, however, walked onto the field with a more relaxed pace. Some stretched their shoulders, some talked casually. A few simply stood still, looking around the landscape, as if studying every corner without drawing attention to themselves. Their movements didn't match the polished display of the coalition troops, but there was something grounded about the way they carried themselves. The coalition commander stepped forward and greeted the veterans with a respectful nod. He tried to hide his uncertainty, but the veterans had sharp eyes. They understood people far better than most realized. They could see the mix of confidence and confusion sitting behind the commander's calm face. Earth's liaison raised a hand to gather everyone's attention. He spoke clearly, explaining that the joint exercise would begin as a simple exploration of the terrain. The two groups would move separately at first, then engage in simulated scenarios where they would test each other's strategies. The coalition soldiers nodded firmly, ready for the challenge. The veterans exchanged simple glances among themselves, a wordless confirmation that they understood what was coming. The field chosen for the exercise stretched across uneven ground. There were dips, rises, clusters of trees, and patches of tall grass. Small rocks and broken branches lay in random places, and the wind carried dust from the nearby hills. It wasn't a smooth, polished environment. It was real, something the veterans had always trained in, and something the coalition had rarely seen dot as soon as the signal was given. The coalition soldiers spread into perfectly shaped lines. Their steps were synchronized, and each soldier maintained equal distance from the next. Their helmets displayed digital maps, showing their route and their formation. Everything they did was clean, quiet, and coordinated. The veterans walked forward more slowly. They didn't form a straight line. They didn't rely on digital displays. They relied on instinct and experience. They scanned the terrain in a way the coalition didn't understand. Their eyes searched for shadows, natural cover, and subtle movements in the environment. A few coalition observers watched from a distance. They whispered among themselves as they took notes. Some admired their own troops' precision. Others wondered why the veterans moved with such irregular patterns. One observer even asked, "Why are they spreading out like that? There's no structure." But that was the point. The veterans didn't believe in forcing the land to match a plan. They believed in adapting to what the land offered. As both groups continued forward, the coalition soldiers followed their assigned path exactly. They hardly looked up from their displays. The veterans, meanwhile, wandered through different sections of the field, sometimes disappearing behind trees, sometimes moving along small slopes. They didn't rush. They didn't worry about being seen. They simply moved where their instincts guided them. The first simulated encounter was meant to be simple, a harmless test. The coalition soldiers were to locate a target point on the field. The veterans' role was to observe and respond naturally. The coalition commander gave the order, and the troops advanced quickly with perfect formation. But something unusual happened. Before the coalition reached the target area, they suddenly realized the veterans were no longer visible. They checked their maps, glanced around, and tried to adjust their formation. The veterans had not rushed or jumped or used fancy equipment. They had simply moved with quiet intention, and the coalition troops hadn't noticed them slipping out of sight. A nervous whisper spread among the coalition ranks. Where did they go? No one had an answer. Earth's liaison watched calmly, his arms crossed. This was the moment he knew would happen. A soft rustling sound came from behind a cluster of bushes. A coalition soldier turned his head, trying to locate it. But before he could figure out the source, a veteran stepped out from behind a tree, raising a harmless marker signal that meant he had reached the soldier. Unnoticed, the coalition soldier froze in disbelief. Then, from another angle, another veteran appeared. And then another dot within moments. Half the coalition formation realized they were surrounded not by force, not by aggression, but by simple, clever positioning. The veterans had moved through terrain quietly, blending with shadows and natural cover. Their steps were soft, their breathing steady, their awareness sharp. They didn't rely on technology to guide them. They relied on instinct and experience developed long before this day. The coalition commander quickly signaled a reset. He tried to explain to his troops that they needed to increase awareness, spread their sensors wider, and adjust their lines. The soldiers nodded seriously, feeling their pride stung just a little. They weren't angry, just surprised. They had expected to impress the veterans, not be caught off guard by them. During the second phase of the exercise, the coalition changed their approach. They widened their formation and made their movements slightly more flexible. They used drones to watch the field from above. They believed this time they would detect the veterans easily. For a moment, the drones spotted movement shapes shifting between the tall grass. The coalition commander ordered his troops to advance quickly. But when they reached the spot, nothing was there. The veterans had already moved on. One soldier whispered, "How do they move so fast?" Another replied, "They weren't moving fast. We were just looking the wrong way." The veterans used the land as a natural partner, not as something to overpower. If a branch snapped, they paused. If the wind changed, they adjusted their path. If light shifted, they used shadows. To them, these choices came naturally. They weren't tricks. They were habits built over years of real training. The coalition soldiers tried hard to keep up. They reshaped their lines again, tried to predict patterns, and scanned the ground more carefully. But the veterans didn't follow predictable patterns. They were fluid, flexible, unrestricted. After several attempts to locate them, one coalition soldier sighed under his breath. "It's like they vanish." And in a way, they did. Sometimes the veterans were only a few steps away, hidden by a tree or a small rise in the ground. Sometimes they were further away, watching the coalition soldiers struggle to make sense of the terrain. They never moved with loud steps or sharp motions. They moved like people who understood that combat wasn't a clean, organized event. It was something that demanded awareness, patience, and the ability to change direction in an instant. A few coalition officers grew frustrated, not angry, but confused. They kept checking their maps and sensors, trying to understand how Earth's veterans managed to slip away every time. The veterans didn't use cloaking devices or advanced camouflage. They simply understood the land better. Finally, near midday, the coalition commander called for a short break. His troops looked relieved. They removed their helmets, wiped sweat from their faces, and sat on the ground. The veterans approached calmly, some smiling kindly, others simply observing the visitors with patient eyes. One veteran walked over to a young coalition soldier who looked especially confused. Sitting down next to him, the veteran said gently, "You're doing fine. You're following the rules you were taught." The soldier glanced at him and asked, "Then why do we keep losing track of you?" The veteran chuckled softly. "Because the land doesn't care about your rules," he said. "And we don't force ourselves to fight against it. We let it guide us." The soldier looked down at the ground, then at the trees in the distance, trying to understand. The veteran continued, "You move well. You're disciplined. But you're relying on what your screens tell you. You're not looking at the world itself." The soldier nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. The break ended, and the final phase of the exercise began. This time, the coalition tried to mix discipline with observation. They moved more freely, allowed themselves small changes in formation, and tried to rely less on digital displays. They improved, but the veterans still remained one step ahead. In the last few minutes of the exercise, the veterans appeared on a small ridge overlooking the field. They raised their hands in a friendly signal to show the exercise was complete. The coalition soldiers gathered below, exhausted but thoughtful. The commander looked at the veterans and admitted openly, "We did not expect this. We thought our methods would be enough." One of the veterans replied kindly, "Your methods are good. They just need something real added to them." There was no pride in his voice, no boasting, just honesty. The coalition understood. They had just witnessed something their simulations had never prepared them for: real unpredictability, real adaptation, and real instinct. Earth's veterans had shown them that combat wasn't just rules and formations. It was awareness. It was calmness under pressure. It was understanding the world around you in a way that technology alone could not teach. And though the exercise ended peacefully, the lesson stayed with the coalition soldiers. They realized they had not mastered combat. He woke up earlier than usual that morning, long before the sun even touched the windows. For a few minutes, he just sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the quiet of the house. It was strange how silence could feel heavy, almost like it was holding a message he hadn't understood yet. Maybe it was the weight of everything that had happened in the last few days. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the beginning of something he could not explain. He rubbed his face and took a slow breath, trying to clear his thoughts. He knew he had to go back to that place again today. There were questions hanging in the air, things that didn't make sense, people who still needed answers. And even though he felt tired, something inside him kept pushing him forward. It wasn't courage exactly, just a quiet insistence that he couldn't stop now. When he stepped out of the house, the air outside felt cold but fresh, like a warning and a welcome at the same time. The streets were still empty. The sky was slowly shifting from dark blue to the first pale signs of morning. For a moment, he stood there, watching the sky, feeling like the day was preparing itself for something important. Not as he walked toward the old building again. Memories from the previous day replayed in his head. The confused voices, the sudden change of emotions, the looks people gave him like they knew something he didn't. All of it felt unfinished, like a story missing half its pages. He didn't like that feeling. He needed clarity. He needed truth, even if it scared him. That by the time he reached the building, the sun had completely risen. It spread a soft, warm light across the walls, making everything look colder than it had yesterday. He paused for a second before going inside, almost expecting someone to stop him or warn him. But no one was there. The hallway felt strangely peaceful, though he could sense that something had shifted. He found the group sitting almost exactly where they had been the day before, except this time their faces looked more relaxed, almost relieved. When they saw him entering, a few of them exchanged glances, as if they had been waiting for him. It made him uneasy, but he tried not to show it. One of the older individuals, who had spoken confidently the day before, nodded at him and motioned for him to sit down. The gesture was gentle, not forceful, yet it still carried a sense of importance. He sat quietly, placing his hands on his lap, trying to prepare himself for whatever conversation was coming. The older individual leaned forward slightly and said in a calm voice, "You came early today. That's good. We have a lot to discuss." He didn't respond immediately. He just watched their faces, some curious, some worried, some hopeful. He wondered what they saw when they looked at him. Did they think he understood more than he really did? Did they expect something from him? Or were they simply trying to make sense of everything the same way he was? After a moment, he finally asked the question that had been haunting him since last night. "What exactly do you expect me to do? I still don't understand why all of you are looking at me like I'm part of something." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then the older individual answered, choosing the words carefully. "We don't expect anything from you. Not yet. But we believe you're connected to this situation in ways you might not realize. You've seen things, felt things, and reacted in ways that others couldn't. He frowned, confused. What does that even mean? Another person stepped in, speaking softly but firmly. It means you notice details that others ignore. You sense when something is wrong, even before it becomes obvious. And yesterday, when everything turned chaotic, you stayed calm. You saw the patterns. You understood the danger before anyone else. He shook his head slowly. I wasn't calm. I was scared. Being scared doesn't mean you weren't aware, the person replied. Sometimes fear sharpens the mind. He didn't know what to say to that. He wished they would speak plainly instead of hinting at things. But at the same time, a part of him understood what they were trying to say. He had always been the kind of person who paid attention to small things, sounds, expressions, changes in mood. He had always been able to sense when something wasn't right, even before people said anything. He never thought of it as something special. It was just how he was. But now, hearing them speak about it like it mattered, made him feel strangely responsible. Before he could respond again, someone from the back spoke unexpectedly. We think you're the only one who can help us understand what's really happening. Help you? He repeated. How? I don't even understand it myself. The older individual leaned back in the chair and sighed softly. Let's start from the beginning. Everything changed 2 weeks ago. People began acting differently. Some became more aggressive without any reason. Others withdrew completely. Some were confused. Some forgot things. And all of it happened too suddenly to be normal. He listened carefully, trying to imagine what they must have gone through. The older individual continued, We've tried explaining it in many ways. Stress, lack of sleep, fear, social pressure. But none of the reasons fit. And then yesterday happened. The entire group shifted at once. It wasn't natural. He remembered that moment vividly, the tension, the shouting, the sudden silence afterward. It still made his stomach tighten when he thought about it. We need someone who can see what we can't, the older individual said. Someone who isn't influenced the same way. Someone who thinks differently. That's why we believe you can help. He wanted to argue. He wanted to insist that they were mistaken. But there was something sincere in their voices, something that made him hesitate. They weren't forcing him. They weren't flattering him. They were simply desperate for clarity, and somehow they believed he held a part of it. He looked at his hands again, feeling the weight settling on his shoulders. He wasn't used to people relying on him. He wasn't used to being the center of anything. Yet right now, he could feel their hope, and it made him uneasy in a way he didn't expect. After a long pause, he said quietly, I can try, but I can't promise anything. A soft wave of relief moved through the group, as if his words had eased something heavy inside them. No one cheered or smiled, but the room felt lighter. The older individual nodded gratefully. Trying is all we ask. They spent the next several hours talking. Not fast, not pressured, just slow. Detailed conversations where each person shared what they had experienced over the past 2 weeks. Every strange feeling, every moment they couldn't explain, every dream that felt too real, every sudden shift in emotions. He listened to all of it. At first it made him uncomfortable, then curious, and eventually thoughtful. He asked them questions, simple ones, but important. When did the changes start? Where were they at that time? Who was with them? What were they thinking? What had they eaten? Had anything unusual happened before the first symptoms appeared? The more he listened, the more he noticed patterns, small ones at first, but they grew clearer as the hours passed. Certain people had been in the same places. Some had met the same strangers. Some had received similar messages on their phones. Some had heard the same sound in the middle of the night. None of it was proof, but the details connected in ways that didn't feel accidental. By late afternoon, his mind felt full, but strangely alive. He could sense that he was getting closer to something, maybe not the answer, but at least the right direction. And for the first time, the confusion he had been carrying for days felt like it was turning into purpose. When he finally stood to leave, the group didn't stop him. They didn't ask him for promises. They simply watched him with quiet trust, as if they believed he would return with more clarity the next day. He walked home slowly, letting the cool air clear his thoughts. The sky was turning a deep orange, reflecting the end of a long but meaningful day. He didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he couldn't stop now. Something important was unfolding, and he had somehow become a part of it. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking towards something instead of running away from it. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, he felt ready to face whatever came next. He didn't sleep very well that night. Even though his body felt tired, his mind kept replaying everything he had heard from the group earlier. Every story, every strange moment, every detail they shared, it all stayed with him like a long echo that refused to fade. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought about the patterns he had noticed, the connections he saw, and the strange feeling that something bigger was happening behind the scenes. When he finally opened his eyes in the morning, he wasn't even sure if he had slept properly or not. He felt heavy and restless at the same time. For a few minutes, he lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand the thoughts crowding his head. Something inside him was telling him that today would be important, maybe even more than yesterday. He pushed himself up, washed his face with cold water, and tried to settle his mind. The cold water helped a little, but the uneasy feeling remained. As he stepped outside, the morning air felt more tense than usual, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Birds were calling softly from the trees, but even their voices sounded different, almost cautious. He walked slowly toward the old building again, letting his feet find their rhythm. The streets were more crowded than usual. People seemed restless, looking at their phones, talking in low voices, some walking quickly as if trying to escape something they could not explain. He noticed these things naturally, without effort. He always noticed small details like this, but today they felt sharper and more important. He reached the building sooner than he expected. Before entering, he paused for a moment, letting out a slow breath. The place looked the same, but after what he had learned yesterday, it felt different, almost heavier with meaning. He walked inside, and the hallway greeted him with familiar stillness. The group was already there when he arrived, gathered in the same place, though today their faces looked more serious. A quiet tension hung between them, as if something new had happened while he was gone. Some sat with their hands clasped tightly. Some were whispering to each other, and some simply stared at the floor. Deep in thought, when he stepped into the room, they turned to him, and he could sense their worry immediately. "We were hoping you'd come early," one of them said quietly. "Something happened this morning." He felt a small pull of concern in his chest. What happened? A younger member of the group, someone who rarely spoke, stood up and stepped forward. Their voice was shaky at first, but they tried to speak clearly. "It started when I woke up. I heard a strange sound outside my house. It wasn't loud, just a soft, repeating tone. Almost like a machine humming, but not exactly a machine. It felt like it was coming from the ground." He listened carefully. The person continued. "Then when I stepped outside to check, the sound suddenly stopped, and the air felt heavier. I don't know how to explain it. It felt like the world slowed down for a second." Another person added, "I heard a similar sound too, from the alley near my house. I thought it was a car engine, but cars don't sound like that." More voices chimed in. At least half the group had experienced something similar that morning. Different places, different times, but the description was almost the same. A low, repeating tone, disappearing the moment they went to check. He stood silently, absorbing each detail. His mind worked quickly, trying to piece the information together. Sounds that appeared and disappeared. People acting strange. Patterns forming in their stories. Something was definitely happening. Something larger than any of them understood. The older individual stepped forward and said, "We need your help again. Yesterday, you saw patterns in our experiences. Maybe you can understand what this new thing means." He took a slow breath. He didn't want to pretend he knew everything. He didn't want to act like a leader. But he also knew they were trusting him, not because he was special, but because he paid attention in ways others didn't. He asked, "Did anyone record the sound? Or notice where exactly it came from?" Most shook their heads. A few tried to record it, but their phones malfunctioned at that moment. The recordings were empty, like silence. That detail troubled him. He asked more questions about timing, location, what they were doing before they heard the sound, whether they felt dizzy or confused afterward. He noticed something new. Almost everyone who heard the sound had reported feeling unusually tired afterward. Not sleepy, just drained, like their energy had been quietly taken from them. His mind returned to the patterns from yesterday. People acting strangely. Sudden emotional changes, confusion, fear, and now a sound that made people feel weaker. He didn't know what it meant. But it didn't feel normal, after an hour of discussion. He decided they needed to step outside the building together. He wanted to check the streets, the corners, the alleys, any place where the sound might have come from. He didn't know what he expected to find, but doing nothing felt wrong. The group agreed and followed him. They walked down a narrow street first. It looked ordinary at a glance, but he took his time studying everything, the cracks in the walls, the closed shop shutters, the small pieces of broken plastic on the ground, even the smell of the air. He had always been good at noticing things others ignored. It wasn't long before he found something unusual near the base of a streetlight. Covered partially by dust and leaves, he noticed a small circular mark on the ground. Not a natural shape, too even, too perfectly cut. It looked like something had pressed into the ground recently, leaving behind a clean circle. He crouched down to look at it closely. One of the group members asked, "What do you think it is?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm not sure. But this doesn't look like something that happens by accident." He scanned the area around the mark. A few steps away, he found another similar indent, much fainter, as if whatever made it had moved, but left a lighter trace the second time. He stood up and looked around the street. Did anyone hear the sound near this area? A few people nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stared at the marks, thinking deeply. They weren't dangerous, at least not by themselves. But they meant something had been here. Something that left impressions on the ground. Something that wasn't an animal or a person. Something quiet, and maybe something moving at times when no one was watching. They continued walking around the neighborhood. They found another faint circular mark near a corner shop, then another near a parked car, then two more near the park entrance. The group grew uneasy as they realized these marks were scattered everywhere, soft, subtle, hidden, but real. This can't be normal, one of them whispered. What's leaving these marks? He didn't have an answer, but deep inside, something told him that the marks, the sounds, and the strange behavior people were experiencing were all part of the same chain. When they returned to the building, the tension in the room grew even heavier. Everyone looked at him now, waiting for him to say something, anything that could make sense of what they had seen. He took a long breath and spoke slowly. Whatever this is, it's not random. It's not the weather. It's not a small accident. Something is happening across this area, and it's affecting people more than they realize. The sounds, the marks, the sudden behavior changes, they're all connected. One person asked, Connected how? He hesitated. He didn't want to frighten anyone. He didn't want to jump to the wrong conclusion. So he spoke gently. I don't know exactly what's behind it, but I do know we need to stay alert. These things are not happening for no reason. Silence filled the room again. Then he continued. We should keep track of every small detail, every sound, every strange moment, every place where you see something unusual. Write everything down. Nothing is too small. The more we understand, the closer we get to the truth. The group nodded slowly. They trusted him, not because he had all the answers, but because he listened, understood, and tried to piece things together without fear. They discussed their plan for the next day. They decided to split into small groups, walk around different areas, and observe everything quietly. They agreed to meet again in the evening and share whatever they found out by the time the meeting ended. The sun was already lowering in the sky. As he stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushed against his face. He felt tired, but his mind was clearer than it had been in days. He knew the coming days would not be easy. Something strange was unfolding, something that would challenge everything they thought they understood. But he also felt a quiet strength inside him, a sense of purpose. He didn't know why he had become part of this, but he didn't want to walk away now. As he walked home, he looked around at the streets, the people, the cars, the lights flickering in windows. Everything looked normal, yet hidden behind that normal appearance was a mystery slowly growing bigger. And he knew, without any doubt, that he would return tomorrow, ready to face whatever truth waited for him, no matter how unexpected it might be. He woke up earlier than usual the next morning. It wasn't because of an alarm or any noise outside. It was simply because something inside him refused to let him rest any longer. His mind was already awake, already processing everything that had happened yesterday, already preparing itself for what the new day might bring. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the dim early light coming through the window. The world outside seemed calm, but he could feel a heaviness beneath that calm, like storm clouds waiting to gather, even when the sky looked clear. It wasn't fear, he felt it was awareness. The kind that grows in a person when they know something important is approaching. He got out of bed, washed his face, and stepped outside. The air smelled faint today, fresher, but also colder. Almost like the world itself was warning everyone to pay attention. As he walked back toward the old building, he noticed something strange about the people on the street. They weren't exactly afraid, but they looked more alert than usual. Some paused and looked around while walking. Some looked up at the sky for no reason. Others kept touching their ears or rubbing the back of their necks, almost subconsciously. He recognized this behavior immediately. It was the same response he and the group had discussed, the same reaction people experienced right before hearing the strange tone or deciding something felt off for no clear reason. He made mental notes as he walked, watching how many people had unknowingly become part of this growing pattern. When he reached the building, the group was already waiting for him. They weren't chatting today. They weren't sitting casually. Instead, most stood in a tight circle, whispering quietly. As soon as he entered, they looked up at him with a mix of relief and worry. You need to hear this, one of them said quickly. Something new happened last night. He listened carefully as they explained. One person had been walking home when they felt a short vibration under their feet, as if the ground pulsed once. Another said lights in their house flickered for a few seconds without any electrical issues. Someone else said they saw a faint flash near the edge of a park too bright to be natural, too quick to be a camera or car. Every story captured his attention, especially because none of these people lived near each other. These events were happening across different blocks, different streets, different directions. And yet, the experiences shared the same quiet pattern. He thought to himself that whatever was behind, this had moved beyond small signals. These new signs were bigger, clearer, and possibly more deliberate. He asked them one simple question. Did any of you feel afraid when it happened? Most shook their heads. A few hesitated, then admitted they felt confused or uneasy. But none said they were terrified. None said they felt danger. And that, somehow, made it even stranger. Something was happening not to scare them, but almost as if something was trying to reveal itself slowly. He asked them to sit. Not because he wanted to lead them like a teacher, but because he needed them calm while he tried to understand the puzzle forming in his mind. For several minutes, he said nothing. He simply closed his eyes, thinking about every detail from the past week, the strange behaviors people had reported, the unknown sound, the marks on the ground, the faint flashes, the sudden emotional shifts. Every new clue did not contradict the earlier ones. They all fit together in a way that was hard to explain with normal reasons. He opened his eyes and looked at them. "I don't think this is random," he said softly. "I don't even think this is something harmful. But it's definitely not natural. And it's getting stronger." They listened carefully, leaning in. He continued, "Things like this, they don't happen quietly for no reason. It feels like something is trying to come closer, or trying to understand us. And lately, it's been showing more signs." One person whispered, "Do you think we're being watched?" He thought about the question before answering. Maybe not watched, but noticed. The room fell silent. Not one person laughed or dismissed what he said. They had already seen too much to ignore possibilities. He decided they needed to do something different today. Instead of just observing the neighborhood, they needed to follow the signs, not just passively collect them. If something was trying to connect, they had to understand what direction it was moving in. He asked them to describe the exact places where the new events happened. They took turns pointing at a simple paper map on the table. He watched the spots carefully as they marked them. Then something clicked. Every event, every pulse, every flash, every flicker formed a rough half circle around a particular part of the neighborhood. Not a perfect circle, but enough to show a clear direction. He pointed to the middle of that half circle. "Something is happening here." It was an old open field behind the abandoned train yard. Overgrown, forgotten, hardly visited by anyone, except a few stray dogs or kids who played there sometimes. The area had no cameras, no bright lights, and barely any foot traffic. If something wanted to approach quietly, that would be the perfect place. "We should go there," he said simply. The group didn't argue. They stood up and followed him out of the building. The walk was longer than usual, but the entire way they stayed quiet, each person lost in their thoughts. The world around them felt heavier with every step. When they reached the entrance of the field, they stopped. The place looked exactly the same as always dry grass. Broken concrete, old rails half buried in dirt, pieces of scrap metal lying around. At first glance, nothing looked unusual. But he didn't trust first glances anymore. He stepped forward slowly, scanning the ground, the air, the shadows. Others spread out behind him, searching in silence. Not even 5 minutes passed before he found something. A small circular mark on the dirt, exactly like the ones they found yesterday. Then a few steps away, another. And another. The marks formed a trail. He followed the trail until he reached the center of the field. And that was where he saw something that made him stop completely. The grass at the very center was flattened. Not in a random way, but in a perfectly smooth round shape, as if something had landed there, or rested there, or existed there in a way the ground could not hide. The group gathered around him, staring at the flattened circle silently. Someone whispered, "What could do this?" He knelt down and touched the ground. The soil felt warm. Not hot, not burning, just warm. Warmer than the air around them. He stood up slowly, trying to understand. This place wasn't abandoned after all. Something had been visiting this field repeatedly. And whatever it was getting less careful about hiding its presence. A soft wind blew across the field. And in that moment, something new happened. They heard the sound. A low, pulsing tone, not loud, not sharp, but clear enough to feel inside their chests. It came from somewhere near the center of the field. Everyone froze. The tone wasn't frightening. It wasn't aggressive. It felt curious, like a question in sound form. One of the group members whispered, "Is it coming from under the ground?" Another whispered, "Or from above?" He didn't know. But he knew one thing. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It felt almost like an invitation. The tone faded slowly. After a few seconds, no one spoke for a long time. Then he finally said, "Whatever this is, it's not here to harm us. It's trying to show us something. Maybe trying to understand us. Maybe trying to communicate." The group exchanged long, nervous looks, but no one disagreed. He continued, "We don't have all the answers. But we're the first people to notice this. And if it wants to show itself slowly, then we have to be patient. We have to observe. And when the right moment comes, we'll understand what it wants." The group nodded quietly. They stood together in the center of the field, watching the flattened circle. Each person feeling something different: fear, hope, curiosity, wonder, but all knowing they had crossed into something bigger than simple strange events. As he looked around the field one last time, he had a quiet realization. This story wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. Something had reached out, and now they were the ones reaching back.